The restaurant lights dimmed as Sarah leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, Mark, before this goes any further. I'm a single mom. 3 kids. If you want to leave now, I understand." Her eyes, which had sparkled all evening, now held a guarded vulnerability that stopped Mark's breath. He thought of his own daughter waiting at home with his sister, and the years he'd spent raising her alone. The moment stretched between them like a tightrope, one he wasn't sure either of them was brave enough to cross. Hey everyone! If this opening grabbed your attention, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories that explore the real, raw moments of human connection. Your support helps us bring more content like this to life. Mark hadn't planned on dating again, not after Claire died. 4 years had passed since cancer took his wife, leaving him alone with their 2-year-old daughter, Emma. 4 years of bedtime stories read in funny voices, of learning to braid hair through YouTube tutorials, of answering questions about mommy with a lump in his throat. 4 years of putting one foot in front of the other, of building a life that felt almost whole. At 35, Mark had settled into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were a blur of dropping Emma off at school, throwing himself into his work as an architect, picking her up, making dinner, helping with homework, and tucking her in. Weekends were for adventures, the zoo, the park, movies with popcorn that always spilled on the floor. His life revolved around Emma's smile, around making sure she never felt the absence of her mother too keenly. Dating hadn't even been on his radar until his sister, Jen, staged what she called an intervention on a rainy Sunday afternoon while Emma was at a friend's birthday party. "You need to have a life, Mark," she said, sitting across from him at his kitchen table. "A real adult life." "I have a life," he protested, gesturing around the living room where Emma's toys were scattered across the floor. "A good one." Jen's expression softened. "Claire would want you to be happy. Not just existing." "I am happy," he insisted, but the words felt hollow even to his own ears. "When was the last time you had a conversation that didn't involve Disney princesses or multiplication tables?" Jen asked, raising an eyebrow. Mark couldn't remember. That night, after Emma was asleep, he found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, hair a little too long, stubble a little too unkempt. When had he stopped caring about how he looked? When had he stopped seeing himself as anything other than Emma's dad? The next day, he let Jen set up his profile on a dating app. "Just coffee," she insisted. 1 hour of adult conversation. "That's all I'm asking." He agreed, mostly to get her off his back. He didn't expect to match with anyone. He certainly didn't expect Sarah. Sarah's profile was simple. 33, kindergarten teacher, lover of old movies and hiking trails. Her smile in her photos was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that made something in Mark's chest stir to life. They messaged back and forth for a week before he worked up the courage to ask her to dinner. Just dinner, he told himself as he stood in front of his closet, trying to remember what people wore on dates. Just a conversation. He settled on dark jeans and a blue button-down that Claire had always said brought out his eyes. The thought of Claire approving of his outfit for a date with another woman felt strange, but not as painful as he'd expected. Jen arrived to watch Emma, her eyes widening when she saw him. "Well, look at you," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "You clean up nice, big brother." Emma, now 6 and fiercely independent, looked up from her coloring book. "Where are you going, Daddy?" Mark knelt down beside her. "Remember how we talked about Daddy having dinner with a friend tonight?" Emma nodded solemnly. "A lady friend," she said, repeating Jen's words from earlier in the week. "That's right," Mark said, his heart squeezing at her serious expression. "But I'll be back to tuck you in, okay? Promise?" Emma asked, holding out her pinky. Mark linked his pinky with hers. "Promise." The restaurant was busier than Mark had anticipated, and he arrived 5 minutes late, scanning the crowded tables for Sarah. He spotted her in a corner booth, wearing a simple green dress that complemented her auburn hair. She looked up as he approached, and the smile that spread across her face made his palms sweat. "I was starting to think you changed your mind," she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "Sorry," he said, feeling awkward and out of practice. "Parking was a nightmare." "I'm just glad you're here," she replied, and the warmth in her voice eased some of the tension in his shoulders. The conversation flowed more easily than Mark had expected. Sarah was funny and thoughtful, asking questions about his work and listening intently to his answers. He found himself telling her about projects he was passionate about, ideas he hadn't shared with anyone in years. "So what made you become a kindergarten teacher?" he asked as they waited for their entrees. Sarah's eyes lit up. "I've always loved that age, they're so curious about everything, so open to the world. Every day is an adventure." She paused, taking a sip of her wine. "Plus, they're brutally honest. A 5-year-old will tell you exactly what they think of your new haircut." Mark laughed. "Emma's the same way. Last week she told me my cooking was not as bad as usual, which I think was meant to be a compliment." Sarah's smile faltered slightly at the mention of Emma, but she recovered quickly. "How old is your daughter?" 6, Mark said, pulling out his phone to show her a picture of Emma missing her 2 front teeth, grinning widely. "She's the center of my universe." Sarah studied the photo, her expression softening. "She's beautiful. She has your smile." "Everyone says she looks just like her mom," Mark said, the words coming out before he could stop them. A brief silence fell between them. Mark hadn't planned to bring up Claire so early, but now that he had, he felt he should explain. "My wife passed away 4 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm so sorry, Mark." "It's been a long road," he admitted. "But Emma and we're doing okay." Sarah nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been, must still be." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Mark noticed a new tension in Sarah's posture, as if she was holding something back. By the time they finished their meals, however, the easy rapport between them had returned. They shared a dessert, chocolate lava cake that erupted when Sarah's fork pierced its center, making them both laugh as they tried to contain the mess. It was the most fun Mark had had in years. As they walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, he found himself reluctant for the night to end. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked, gesturing toward the park across the street. "It's a beautiful night." Sarah hesitated, checking her watch. "I should probably get home soon, but, yes, a short walk would be nice." They strolled through the park, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. Mark found himself telling Sarah about Emma's latest obsession with space, how he'd built her a telescope out of cardboard tubes and old magnifying glasses. "That's incredible," Sarah said, genuine admiration in her voice. "You're a good dad, Mark." "I try," he said, feeling both proud and slightly embarrassed by her praise. "What about you? Any hobbies besides molding young minds?" Sarah laughed. "I paint sometimes, watercolors, nothing serious. And I'm trying to learn Spanish, though I'm pretty terrible at it." "¿Por qué estás aprendiendo español?" Mark asked, his accent terrible but his grammar surprisingly accurate. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "You speak Spanish?" "Barely," he admitted. "I worked in Barcelona for a year after college. I've forgotten most of it, but some phrases stick with you." "That's more than I can say," Sarah replied. "My students are more fluent than I am, which is both humbling and hilarious." They reached a bench overlooking a small pond, its surface reflecting the moonlight. Mark gestured to it. "Shall we?" They sat down, closer than they had been at the restaurant. Mark could smell Sarah's perfume, something light and floral that reminded him of spring. For a moment, neither of them spoke, content to watch the ripples on the water. "I had a really nice time tonight," Mark said finally, turning to look at her. "So did I," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of warmth and hesitation that made Mark's heart beat faster. He leaned in slightly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that sent electricity coursing through Mark's body. It had been so long since he'd felt this kind of connection, this spark of possibility. When they pulled apart, Sarah's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if she was savoring the feeling. When she opened them, however, Mark saw conflict there. "Mark," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." The restaurant lights dimmed as Sarah leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, Mark, before this goes any further. I'm a single mom. 3 kids. If you want to leave now, I understand." Her eyes, which had sparkled all evening, now held a guarded vulnerability that stopped Mark's breath. He thought of his own daughter waiting at home with his sister, and the years he'd spent raising her alone. The moment stretched between them like a tightrope, one he wasn't sure either of them was brave enough to cross. Mark's mind raced. 3 kids. The revelation shouldn't have shocked him. She was a kindergarten teacher, after all, someone who clearly loved children. But the thought of not just one child, but 3, made his carefully constructed life seem suddenly precarious. "I should have told you sooner," Sarah continued, filling the silence. "On my profile or in our messages. But I've had so many men disappear the moment they find out, and I wanted one evening where that wasn't hanging over my head." She looked down at her hands. "I understand if this changes things." Mark studied her face, seeing the mixture of defiance and vulnerability there. He thought about how easy it would be to thank her for the evening, to walk away and return to the safe, predictable life he'd built with Emma. No complications, no messy blending of families, no risk of more loss. But then he thought about how he'd felt tonight, alive in a way he hadn't in years. He thought about the way Sarah's eyes crinkled when she laughed, how she'd listened to him talk about Emma with genuine interest, how she'd understood without him having to explain the weight of raising a child alone. "Tell me about them," he said finally. Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "What?" "Your kids," Mark clarified. "Tell me about them." A cautious smile tugged at the corners of Sarah's mouth. "Well, there's Lily, she's 8 and thinks she's going on 30. She's my little bookworm, always with her nose in a story. Then there's Noah, he's 6 and obsessed with dinosaurs. He can pronounce Pachycephalosaurus better than I can." Her smile widened. "And Zoe is 4. She's my wild child, fearless and stubborn and full of energy." As Sarah spoke about her children, her entire face transformed, glowing with pride and love. Mark found himself smiling in response, picturing these 3 little people who were so clearly the center of Sarah's world. "They sound amazing," he said when she paused for breath. "They are," Sarah agreed. "They're also loud and messy and exhausting." She gave a small laugh. "I'm not trying to scare you off, but I want to be honest. My life is chaos most days. Beautiful chaos, but chaos nonetheless." Mark nodded, understanding all too well. "Single parenting isn't for the faint of heart," he said. "Though I only have one to wrangle. I can't imagine 3. Some days, neither can I," Sarah admitted. "But we make it work." She hesitated, then asked, "So, where does this leave us?" It was a fair question. Mark knew that getting involved with Sarah meant getting involved with her children too, eventually. It meant complicated schedules and divided attention and navigating the delicate balance of blending families. It meant opening himself up to more love, but also to more potential heartbreak. "I think," Mark said slowly, "it leaves us with a second date. If you're interested." The relief that washed over Sarah's face made Mark's chest tighten. How many times had she been rejected because of her children? How many men had walked away from this incredible woman because they couldn't see past the complications to the person she was? "I'd like that," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. They finished their walk, making plans to meet again the following weekend. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Mark felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into unknown territory, taking a risk he hadn't been prepared for when he'd left the house that evening. When he arrived home, Jen was curled up on the couch watching a movie, the volume low. "How was it?" she asked, sitting up as he entered. "Good," Mark said, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. "Really good, actually." Jen studied his face. "But?" Mark sighed, sinking into the armchair across from her. "She has 3 kids. "Ah," Jen said, understanding immediately. "And that's a problem because—" "It's not a problem, exactly," Mark said, struggling to articulate his feelings. "It's just complicated. Emma's finally in a good place. We have our routine, our life together. Bringing 3 more children into that equation." "Sounds like you're getting way ahead of yourself," Jen pointed out. "It was one date, Mark, not a marriage proposal." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "I know. But if things did work out, that's what we'd be looking at eventually. Or you could just enjoy getting to know each other and see where it leads," Jen suggested. "Not everything needs to be planned out in advance." Mark knew she was right, but planning was what he did, what he'd had to do since Claire died. Spontaneity was a luxury he couldn't afford as a single parent. "Is Emma asleep?" he asked, changing the subject. "Out like a light," Jen confirmed. "But she made me promise to tell you she tried to stay awake for your goodnight kiss." Mark smiled, feeling the familiar tug of love for his daughter. "I'll peek in on her before I go to bed." After Jen left, Mark stood in Emma's doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. Her room was a testament to her personality, bookshelves overflowing with stories, a small desk covered in drawings, glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling in approximations of real constellations. She was his whole world. But maybe, he thought as he quietly closed her door, there was room in their world for more. The second date with Sarah was at a casual cafe for lunch. They'd both agreed that evening dates were difficult with children, and Mark appreciated Sarah's practicality. She arrived wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking both beautiful and approachable. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Noah couldn't find his favorite dinosaur shirt, which apparently was essential for his playdate today. Mark laughed. "I understand completely. Emma once refused to leave the house because her lucky socks were in the wash." "The struggles are real," Sarah agreed with a grin. They fell into easy conversation, sharing stories about their children and their work. Mark found himself relaxing in Sarah's presence, drawn to her warmth and humor. She didn't shy away from talking about the challenges of single parenthood, but she also spoke about the joys, the small victories and moments of connection that made it all worthwhile. "How did it happen?" Mark asked eventually. "If you don't mind me asking." "Your divorce, I mean." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "It's a pretty common story, unfortunately. David and I married young, right out of college. We had Lily within the first year, and things were good for a while. But then Noah came along, and the stress started to show. By the time I was pregnant with Zoe, we were barely speaking." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "David wasn't a bad person. He just wasn't ready for the reality of family life. He started staying late at work, then not coming home at all some nights." Mark nodded, understanding all too well the strain that parenthood could put on a relationship. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Sarah admitted. "When Zoe was 6 months old, he told me he'd met someone else, someone without the baggage of children and a mortgage. Her voice held no bitterness, just a resigned acceptance. We tried counseling, but his heart wasn't in it. The divorce was finalized 2 years ago. How are the kids handling it? Mark asked. Sarah sighed. Lily remembers what it was like before, so she took it the hardest. Noah was too young to really understand at first, and Zoe has never known any different. She smiled sadly. David sees them every other weekend, but he moved to Seattle last year for work, so it's mostly video calls now. Mark reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You're doing an amazing job with them. That's obvious just from the way you talk about them. Some days are better than others, Sarah said, returning the pressure of his fingers. What about you? How has it been, raising Emma on your own? Mark took a deep breath, the familiar ache of Claire's absence pressing against his ribs. When Claire was diagnosed, Emma was just turning 2. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she fought for almost a year. He paused, the memories washing over him. Those last months, Claire was so focused on preparing me, making lists of Emma's favorite foods, writing down the words to the lullabies she sang, even recording videos for Emma's future birthdays. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She sounds like an incredible mother. She was, Mark agreed. After she died, I was in survival mode for a long time. Just getting through each day, trying to be both parents for Emma. He smiled ruefully. I've gotten better at it, but there are still moments when I feel completely out of my depth. Like when Emma asks for a French braid and you have no idea where to start. Sarah suggested with a gentle smile. Mark laughed. Exactly. YouTube has been my savior more times than I can count. Their conversation continued through lunch and into the afternoon, neither of them in a hurry to end their time together. By the time they finally parted ways, Mark felt a certainty growing within him. He wanted to see where this connection with Sarah might lead. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern of lunch dates and phone calls after their children were in bed. Mark found himself looking forward to their conversations, to hearing about Sarah's day and sharing his own. They discovered a shared love of old movies and terrible puns, a mutual dislike of reality TV and cilantro. The more he learned about her, the more he wanted to know. A month into their relationship, Sarah invited Mark to dinner at her house. The kids will be at their dad's, she explained. I thought it might be nice to have some uninterrupted time together. Mark agreed immediately, both excited and nervous about seeing Sarah's home, the place where she raised her children, where she built her life. Sarah's house was a modest 2-story in a family-friendly neighborhood, with a swing set visible in the backyard. Inside, it was warm and lived in, family photos on the walls, children's artwork displayed proudly on the refrigerator, toys neatly organized in colorful bins. It's not much, Sarah said, watching his face as he took it all in. But it's home. It's perfect, Mark replied honestly. It feels like you. Dinner was homemade lasagna and garlic bread, with a bottle of wine they shared as they talked late into the evening. When Mark finally checked his watch, he was surprised to find it was nearly midnight. I should go, he said reluctantly. Jen has an early meeting tomorrow, and I promised I wouldn't be too late. Sarah walked him to the door, their fingers intertwined. I had a wonderful time tonight, she said, looking up at him with those expressive eyes that had captivated him from the beginning. So did I, Mark replied, drawing her closer. Their kiss was deeper than the ones they'd shared before, filled with a growing desire that made Mark's head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. I don't want to rush this, Sarah whispered, her forehead resting against his. With the kids, we need to be careful. I know, Mark agreed, though his body was arguing otherwise. We'll take it slow. The next step came naturally, introducing Emma to Sarah. Mark chose a casual setting, a Saturday afternoon at the park where Emma could retreat to the playground if she felt uncomfortable. Is she nice? Emma asked as they drove to meet Sarah. Very nice, Mark assured her. She's a teacher, so she's good with kids. Emma considered this. Does she like space? Mark laughed. I don't know, sweetheart. You'll have to ask her. Sarah was waiting for them by the duck pond, her smile nervous but genuine as they approached. She dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Emma, this is my friend Sarah, Mark said. Sarah, this is Emma. It's very nice to meet you, Emma, Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's level. Your dad has told me so much about you. Emma studied Sarah with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old. Do you like space? Sarah didn't miss a beat. I love space. Especially the stars, they're like stories written in the sky. Emma's face lit up. I have a telescope. Daddy made it for me. We look at the stars every clear night. That sounds wonderful, Sarah said. Maybe you could show me sometime? Emma nodded enthusiastically, then turned to Mark. Can we feed the ducks now, Daddy? The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Emma gradually warming up to Sarah, even taking her hand as they walked around the pond. By the time they said goodbye, Emma was chattering away about her school project on the solar system, and Sarah was listening with genuine interest. What did you think of Sarah? Mark asked as they drove home. Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. I like her, she said finally. She listens good. And she knows about Neptune having rings, which most grown-ups don't. Mark smiled, relief washing over him. I'm glad you like her, Em. Do you like her, Daddy? Emma asked, her voice suddenly serious. Mark glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Yes, I do. Very much. Emma nodded, satisfied. That's good. You smile more when you talk about her. The observation, so simple and yet so profound, caught Mark off guard. Had he been smiling more? He realized with a start that Sarah had brought a lightness back into his life that he hadn't even known was missing. The next hurdle was meeting Sarah's children. They decided to do it gradually, starting with just Lily, the oldest. Mark met them at a local ice cream parlor, his stomach in knots as he approached the table where Sarah sat with a solemn-faced girl who looked like a miniature version of her mother. Lily, this is my friend Mark, Sarah said. Mark, this is my daughter Lily. It's nice to meet you, Lily, Mark said, offering his hand. Lily shook it with surprising formality. Mom says you're an architect. That means you design buildings, right? That's right, Mark confirmed, impressed by her directness. I want to be an engineer when I grow up, Lily informed him. I'm good at math. Engineers are very important, Mark said seriously. They make sure the buildings architects design don't fall down. A small smile tugged at Lily's lips. So you need engineers more than engineers need architects. Mark laughed. You might be right about that. The ice cream outing went better than Mark had dared to hope. Lily was bright and articulate, asking thoughtful questions about his work and listening carefully to his answers. By the end of the afternoon, she was showing him her sketchbook full of inventions she'd designed, her initial reserve completely forgotten. Noah and Zoe proved to be easier introductions. Noah was immediately impressed when Mark knew the difference between a Triceratops and a Styracosaurus, while 4-year-old Zoe decided Mark was acceptable when he agreed to push her on the swings, higher, at the park. The real test came when they decided to introduce all the children to each other. They chose a Saturday afternoon at Sarah's house, planning a backyard barbecue that would give the kids plenty of space to interact, or not, as they felt comfortable. Emma clung to Mark's hand as they walked up Sarah's driveway, her earlier confidence replaced by shyness. What if they don't like me, she whispered. Mark squeezed her hand. Just be yourself, Em. That's all you need to do. Sarah greeted them at the door, her smile warm but her eyes betraying her own nervousness. "Everyone's in the backyard," she said. "Noah's been asking when you'd arrive. He wants to show Emma his dinosaur collection." The backyard was spacious, with the swing set Mark had glimpsed before, a sandbox, and a patio where Lily was helping set up a table. Noah was arranging plastic dinosaurs in what appeared to be a complex battle scene, while Zoe was spinning in circles, arms outstretched. "Emma!" Noah called when he spotted them. "Do you want to see my dinosaurs? I have 23. Emma looked up at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. She let go of his hand and walked over to Noah, who immediately began explaining the difference between carnivores and herbivores. "So far, so good," Sarah murmured, standing close to Mark. "Fingers crossed," he agreed, watching as Lily approached Emma and Noah, offering to show Emma her collection of rocks and minerals. The afternoon unfolded better than either of them could have hoped. The children found common ground, Emma and Lily bonding over their shared love of science, Noah teaching Emma the names of all his dinosaurs, and Zoe following the older children around, wanting to be included in everything they did. As Mark stood beside Sarah at the grill, watching the 4 children playing a game of tag across the lawn, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This chaotic, beautiful blending of their families, felt like something he could build a future on. "They're getting along well," Sarah said, following his gaze. "Better than I expected," Mark admitted. "Emma's usually shy with new people." Sarah smiled. "Lily too. But they seem to have hit it off." As the weeks passed, their families spent more time together, movie nights at Mark's house, picnics in the park, a day trip to the zoo. The children grew comfortable with each other, developing their own relationships independent of their parents. Emma looked up to Lily, Noah followed Emma around like an adoring puppy, and Zoe attached herself to Mark, often climbing into his lap for stories. 6 months into their relationship, Mark and Sarah found themselves alone on her couch after all 4 children had finally fallen asleep during a movie night at her house. "I should probably wake Emma and head home," Mark said, though he made no move to get up. Sarah leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Or you could stay," she suggested quietly. "Emma can sleep in Lily's room, there's plenty of space." The implication was clear. They had been taking things slowly, mindful of their children and the complexity of their situation. But the desire between them had been building, becoming harder to ignore. "Are you sure?" Mark asked, his heart racing. Sarah lifted her head to look at him. "I'm sure about you, Mark. About us." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. They began spending more nights together, alternating between their houses, gradually creating a new normal for their blended family. There were challenges, of course, squabbles between the children, adjustments to routines, moments of jealousy or insecurity. But there was also laughter, support, and a deepening bond that encompassed all 6 of them. A year after their first date, Mark took Sarah back to the same restaurant where they'd first met. The same corner booth, the same nervous flutter in his stomach, but for entirely different reasons. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" he asked as they finished their meal. Sarah smiled. "I believe I told you I was a single mom of 3 and gave you an out." Mark reached across the table for her hand. "And I'm so grateful every day that I didn't take it." Sarah's eyes softened. "So am I." Mark took a deep breath. "Sarah, this past year has been the happiest of my life since Claire died. You and your children have brought joy back into our lives in ways I never thought possible." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I'm not just asking you to marry me," Mark said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. "I'm asking if the 6 of us can become a family, officially. If you'll let me love your children as my own, and if you'll continue to love Emma the way you already do." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." The wedding was small and intimate, held in Sarah's backyard the following spring. Emma served as flower girl, Lily as junior bridesmaid, Noah as ring bearer, and Zoe insisted on being the flower baby, throwing petals alongside Emma. Mark's sister Jen stood as his best person, while Sarah's best friend from college was her maid of honor. As they exchanged vows under an arch of flowers, surrounded by their children and closest friends, Mark thought about the journey that had brought them here, from two broken families to one whole one, from loss to love, from solitude to connection. After the ceremony, as their guests mingled and the children ran around the yard in their formal wear, Sarah found Mark standing alone, watching their new family with wonder. "Happy?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. "Beyond happy," he replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for whispering those words to me that night." Sarah looked up at him, confused. "What words?" "That you were a single mom," Mark clarified. "That you gave me the chance to leave before things went further." Sarah smiled. "And thank you for staying." "I'll always stay," Mark promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. That night, as all four children slept under one roof, their roof, Mark and Sarah lay awake, talking about the future. They would face challenges, they knew. Blending families was never simple. But they had built a foundation of honesty, patience, and love that would weather whatever storms came their way. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if we hadn't met?" Sarah asked, her head resting on Mark's chest. Mark thought about the lonely years after Claire died, about the careful life he'd constructed around Emma's needs and his grief. He thought about Sarah struggling to raise 3 children on her own, facing rejection from men who couldn't see past her responsibilities to the remarkable woman she was. "I think we found each other exactly when we needed to," he said finally. "Not a moment too soon or too late." Sarah nodded against his chest. "Perfect timing." As they drifted off to sleep, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a first date that almost ended before it began to a family bound together by choice rather than blood. From 2 single parents struggling to do it all to partners sharing the load. From loneliness to love. Sometimes, he thought as sleep claimed him, the most beautiful beginnings start with the words that should end things. Sometimes, the greatest risk leads to the greatest reward. And sometimes, 2 broken families can come together to create something whole and beautiful and strong. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the complexities of love, family, and second chances. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us all that sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin with vulnerability and courage. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with blended families. We'd love to hear from you.